I, 19F, want to break up with my fiance, 19M, but I don't know what to do. My fiance and I have been in a relationship for over 2.5 years, and we began living together in an apartment in August. He proposed last May because my father is quite a strict Christian, and he preferred that we marry before cohabiting. However, we agreed on an engagement instead. Recently, we have been experiencing frequent arguments, and I have reached my breaking point. I can no longer tolerate the situation, and I doubt my feelings for him have remained. We no longer seem to be compatible. We both work full-time jobs and divide the expenses, yet the majority of the household responsibilities fall onto me. I come home, take a shower, wash the dishes, clean the house, prepare dinner, tidy up afterward, and then relax by watching television before bedtime. He arrives home a few hours after I do, and he typically spends that time on his phone, showers, and then plays video games until it's time for bed. We rarely share meals together anymore, as he chooses to eat in front of his game. If I complain enough, he will occasionally assist with the dishes, but that is infrequent. When he does help, he doesn't do a thorough job. He often overlooks the pots and pans on the stove, or fails to notice dishes left on the table right by the sink, and he tends to complain the whole time. When I express my frustration about his lack of assistance, he responds by asking me to consider his perspective. He claims that he feels guilty for not helping, but chooses to play video games instead. I wonder if he thinks I would rather not do anything else either. However, if I don't take care of things, they will remain undone, placing the decision entirely on him and not on me. When I tell him this, he retorts that if I stopped doing things, he would eventually step up. I refuse to live in a messy environment, so I end the argument and move on, but I find myself resenting him because I feel more like his mother than his partner. This is just one of many issues we face. Additionally, he has a serious problem with spending money. Before we moved in together, I had saved $12,000 while he managed to save only $3,000. His funds disappeared by the end of the month, while I was left with about $6,000 because I purchased most of the furniture. I cannot comprehend what he spent his money on, since I can account for nearly everything I bought for our apartment, and I can only identify a couple of items he contributed. In contrast, I can list countless video games and pointless collectibles he has acquired. He fails to save money, spending his paycheck on bills, and then using the remainder for video games, food delivery, and drinks. He owns a PlayStation 5, a Meta Quest 2, a Nintendo Switch, and an Xbox, and I spent months persuading him not to buy a gaming PC. Whenever he sees something he desires, he purchases it impulsively. He exhibits a complete lack of self-control regarding finances and often dips into his savings to get the items he wants. Last month, we received a notice indicating that we had a month before our electricity would be shut off due to his failure to pay the bill. I had to give him $600 to cover it. He has separate bank accounts. One is designated solely for bills, but he rarely checks it, which led to his oversight concerning the electricity bill. I felt enraged because just 2 months prior, I had to pay the Wi-Fi bill because he didn't have enough funds. For context, we split the rent evenly at 50-50. I cover all grocery expenses and Netflix, while he is responsible for electricity, Wi-Fi, and other subscriptions. Though the bills come out to be fairly even, he pays slightly more since his income is more than double mine. This infuriates me the most because I earn only half of what he does, yet I manage to save more. How am I supposed to envision a future where I cannot depend on him? We had intended to buy a house once our lease ends, since it would be more cost-effective than renting in our state if we found a house under $150,000. My father made the error of telling him he would contribute $10,000 toward a down payment as a wedding gift. Consequently, my fiancé now believes he doesn't need to save as diligently because he assumes that my $4,000 combined with the $10,000 will suffice. No matter how often I tell him we should act as if the $10,000 does not exist, he disregards my concerns. He completely lacks financial literacy. Another significant issue I have is that he watches pornography on Reddit. It has been a recurring issue since the beginning of our relationship, and though he promises to modify his behavior, he ultimately returns to it. He frequently makes jokes about how attractive other women are. In the early stages of our relationship, he would joke about his ex-girlfriends and a girl named Brooke Monk from TikTok. Eventually, he began making comments about individuals we knew personally. We both worked as managers at McDonald's. I worked from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., while he worked from 4 p.m. to midnight. He started jesting about a female colleague who worked in the evenings with him, and it deeply upset me, though he seemed indifferent. In November 2023, I caught him cheating on me with her, which should have prompted me to end the relationship. Yet, for some reason, I forgave him and chose not to. He was communicating with her on Messenger, expressing how much he wanted to be intimate with her. His last messages to her were apologies for kissing her at work. Although they never engaged in sexual activities beyond that kiss, she clearly wasn't interested in him, yet sent him photos of herself in her bra. This occurred shortly after my birthday, and it shattered my heart. He had been living in my parents' home with me in a separate bedroom due to his challenging home life. I felt trapped because I still had feelings for him and didn't want him to return to his previous living situation. He even mentioned suicidal thoughts if I were to let him go, claiming I was his sole reason for living. Consequently, I stayed with him, and the following year we moved into this apartment. However, it has become increasingly difficult for me to imagine remaining with him much longer. We repeatedly argue about these issues, which never seem to improve, and during our disputes, he raises his voice and tells me to be quiet. I cannot tolerate being treated this way and can only anticipate that the situation may worsen over time. I am uncertain how to handle this. Our lease does not expire until July 31st, and if I were to leave, he would struggle to pay rent. I could continue sending him money until the lease ends, yet I feel conflicted about what will happen afterward. He has nowhere else to go, while I could simply move back in with my parents. Furthermore, we have a dog together, and I would be devastated regardless of who keeps her. If I take her, I know he would be even more depressed because of the affection he has for her, but if he keeps her, I would miss her immensely. 2 weeks ago, I expressed my desire to break up, and he left without my knowledge. I discovered through Life 360 that he only went to Walmart and back, but he claimed he left to wreck his car because he felt he didn't want to live without me. I changed my mind then, but nothing has improved since to make me want to stay. Part of me wishes he would physically harm me or cheat on me again so that I wouldn't feel as guilty about leaving him. I feel like a failure for having wasted nearly 3 years of my life. I had not planned on pursuing college because I envisioned a future as a stay-at-home mom with him, which we had discussed. Now I feel foolish for thinking that way. While I understand I still have time to attend college, I am uncertain about what path to take because I do not know what I want for a career. I feel utterly lost and disillusioned as my life has unfolded. I appreciate any advice you could offer. I recognize I have rambled considerably, but I have never shared my feelings with anyone before, and I have a lot of emotions bottled up. I have refrained from discussing our challenges with others as I did not want them to view him negatively, which should have served as a significant red flag for me. To summarize, I want to end my relationship with my fiancé, but our lease does not expire until the end of July, and he frequently threatens suicide whenever I mention breaking up. He would be unable to pay rent without my support, and although I could continue covering the rent until the lease concludes, I do not know whether that is the right choice. After the lease ends, he would not have a place to go, and we also have a dog, and I would be heartbroken regardless of who retains custody of her. Story 2. AO for ending the contact with an online friend. Please take a moment to read this. It would mean a great deal to me. I am about to share a lengthy narrative. Nearly a year ago, I connected with someone online. We formed a bond over shared traumas, and I became emotionally attached almost immediately. This person was consistently respectful and sincere. However, one day, they expressed a desire for us to start sharing our pictures on Snapchat. Their reasoning was that we both struggled with body confidence, and they believed it would be beneficial to appreciate each other's qualities. Although I felt somewhat uneasy, I reasoned that it was my closest friend, so why not? I felt safe. I would share pictures that included my shoulders, albeit infrequently. Our interactions continued with a few video and audio calls, and we developed a close friendship within a few months. Eventually, I decided to reduce our communication due to my personal situation, as I was finding everyday interactions increasingly challenging. When I communicated this, they were displeased and upset. The tipping point came when they pressured me for a video of myself, refused to offer a sincere apology for their insistence, and attempted to deflect blame, downplaying the seriousness of the situation. Here are my personal red flags. I was unprepared for this relationship due to the fear of my parents discovering it. My Asian parents are quite strict. I was grappling with mental health issues and lacked the emotional energy to text every day. My constant worries about our friendship, compounded by the physical distance between us, left me feeling anxious and drained. I struggled with trust issues stemming from my personal experiences. I have a desire for people to like me, but when they get too close, I feel suffocated. I have openly communicated these struggles to them, as they are aware of 95% of my life. Now, here are their red flags. They saved my snaps without my permission. Initially, I hesitated to refuse, as I didn't want to hurt their feelings, a tendency to please people. They eventually deleted the snaps when I requested it. When I inquired about their initial saving of my snaps, they claimed they wished to keep them because it was my first one. I hope this doesn't seem overly dramatic. I was simply uncomfortable. I was primarily present for emotional support rather than anything else. This was clear, as it started as emotional support but later developed into a friendship. However, I could not maintain this due to arising issues. Despite understanding my difficult family background, they expressed a strong desire to speak to my parents about our friendship and were quite insistent, so I eventually provided my siblings' contact information. They can be quite stubborn at times. They exhibited poor communication skills when angry. I once asked them to refrain from using a certain tone, but I received no response. While they had never directed that tone at me, I noticed they spoke about others in that manner when upset. They explained that people in their area use profanity when angry, which made me uncomfortable, as it felt derogatory. I believe I should have been more direct about that issue. I often discuss heavy topics like abuse, and while I understand anger, I prefer to address it without resorting to certain language. As far as I know, they controlled their use of profanity. When we communicated through Snapchat, it sometimes felt as though they expected me to post more frequently. I would receive texts like, "I hope you send a snap." However, I do not believe they pressured me until later when they insisted on a video. Concerning the video incident, it was quite unexpected when they wished to show me a video of themselves being productive. I was pleased for them, which led to a conversation about us starting a productive project together. I thought it was a great idea until they asked me to film myself doing it. When I rejected their suggestion, they reacted very strongly, which prompted me to limit our contact even further. Initially, my decision was based on my mental health, as I mentioned before, but this was the final straw. I still miss them immensely. Before all of this, they were incredibly supportive during one of my lowest points. They would check in on me nearly every day and send me the most thoughtful messages. What stood out most was that they regarded me as their best friend, and I truly enjoyed our time together. I miss all of it. A few days after the situation escalated, I reached out to ask how they were doing, and they said they were upset about everything but managing to thrive in their life. They continue to view the video issue as trivial and are avoiding accountability for their actions. Nonetheless, I acknowledged that I was a red flag and that I couldn't continue the relationship we've maintained for a year because of my personal challenges. I now realize I was attempting to please them. While my issues were indeed significant, their behavior affected me deeply. This is a substantial matter for me. They asserted that I should have clearly said no regarding the video and needed to emphasize my message to illustrate that. Although I didn't explicitly use the word no, I expressed my reluctance, which I believe constitutes a clear refusal. They then claimed to struggle with interpreting people's feelings, particularly through online messages. I didn't know how to respond, as I was at a loss for words. They wanted me to help them recognize similar situations in the future, but I refused. Growing up with a mentally abusive father, I find it challenging to forgive repeated toxic behavior. This friend knows everything about my life yet continues to exhibit such behavior. I feel guilty because they supported me during my toughest times, but I cannot offer help in return. I'm mentally exhausted. I later considered that they wanted to assist me out of their own choice, as I didn't ask for it. While they did provide me with much-needed support, they also caused me pain. It's not my obligation to help them. At times, I feel selfish for wanting to prioritize my own well-being. When I suggested reaching out to them after a while to see how they were, they expressed a desire to avoid rain checks and favored regular daily communication, which I was not inclined to pursue. Given everything that occurred, I decided to block them, believing it to be an unhealthy connection. I want to avoid returning to them every time I feel overwhelmed by life. I aim to confront my challenges independently, although I acknowledge it would have been pleasant to have someone by my side. Ultimately, I realized I would prefer solitude over worrying about others. My thoughts fluctuate significantly. My greatest fear is surrounding myself with individuals like my father who mistreated me. I'm terrified of attracting such people. I've noticed a pattern of befriending those who also carry trauma. I often found myself associating with classmates who were isolated or perceived as different. I hope this does not come across as disrespectful. I value each remarkable person, but I want to emphasize that I feel I'm heading toward a downward spiral. Emotionally, I am struggling and wish to seek help, but I cannot afford therapy because my father lacks a steady job. While he occasionally engages in real estate, I contribute to the household with my part-time job. I am 20 years old. Is this a normal feeling? I aspire to save for my future career, but my current situation feels impossibly frustrating. I would like to ask whether I should unblock my friend, as I contemplate that in a few years, they may comprehend the situation better, or if I am merely repeating an unhealthy cycle. I have attempted to assist my father multiple times, only to compromise my mental peace. I wish to maintain limited contact with my friend until they amend their behavior, but I feel guilty for waiting on a better version of them while neglecting to support my father during this process. Am I deserving of such feelings? They claim to have mentioned me to their family, and I am unsure of their thoughts on this. I feel a sense of guilt, yet I am apprehensive of sinking into a deeper pit. As for my father, he will never change, and I plan to take every opportunity to distance myself from him. Any advice would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for taking the time to read this lengthy message. Story 3. My 25F parents don't really approve of my relationship with my BF, 25M. I need some advice. This post will be lengthy. I have not been sleeping well these past few days, and my mind feels quite foggy, so I apologize in advance if my writing appears confusing or if I struggle to articulate my thoughts clearly. Anyway, my current boyfriend and I are in a long-distance relationship. I met him while studying abroad and, unfortunately, was only able to see him a few times, as we only crossed paths during my final month there. It took a while for us to truly connect, as I tend to be more introverted. However, we developed a mutual affection for one another when I returned to my home country a month later. Although we did not openly discuss it, there was an unspoken understanding between us. The way we communicated and treated each other definitely suggested a bond that went beyond mere friendship. When I got back home, my mother inquired whether I had met anyone during my time studying abroad. Please note that I am still single and have never been in a relationship. I decided to mention this guy, whom we will refer to as Jay. This boy-girl relationship topic had never been openly addressed with my parents before, as there had never been a necessity to discuss it. Even when I had crushes, I never admitted anything to them. Thus, I grew nervous, and to avoid potential questioning, told her we were just friends. Jay and I exchanged texts and phone calls every day, even chatting until we fell asleep, which my mother strongly disapproved of, but I will explain that later. This routine continued for several months until my mother began to suspect that something more was happening and decided to confront me. At that point, I admitted to her that there was a mutual affection, although I never labeled our connection as being officially in a relationship. She informed my father, and then our discussions turned to topics such as his profession, family background, beliefs, aspirations, and similar matters. A bit of background on Jay. His mother left when he was young, and his father had to work to support the family, so he was mainly raised by his grandmother. The financial situation was challenging, and he barely graduated from high school before starting to work. He moved to the capital city in search of better job prospects and held various jobs there. Everything was going well until he was involved in a car accident that prevented him from working his usual jobs for several months. Consequently, he returned to his small hometown to recuperate. It has been about a year since the accident, and he now lives with his father. He has started streaming and engaging with social media, earning more than the average person in his hometown. However, he did mention that he has some debts from a failed business venture in the capital and is still in the process of repaying them. His income is not entirely stable either. It fluctuates depending on the time of year. His primary goal is to save enough money to afford a home he can call his own. During this time, I also had to take my medical licensing examination, which I unfortunately did not pass, prompting me to retake it this year. While it is true that it was difficult, I must admit that I allowed this relationship to distract me from dedicating myself fully to studying for the exam, much to my parents' disappointment. As most parents would be, my parents were concerned about his ability to support me in the future, the trajectory of our relationship, and its potential outcomes. Would I end up being the sole breadwinner? If we were to have children in the future, would I have to manage child rearing, earn an income, and take care of him? How would responsibilities be divided? This was particularly complicated if I were to move to his country. There were just too many factors to consider. A significant point was that he was not a Christian, which was a crucial criterion for my parents. Therefore, my mother advised me to recognize my boundaries and refrain from further involvement in this relationship, which included not falling asleep with him on the phone beside me, as she was worried that the phone would overheat and explode while I was sleeping. Raised in a Christian family and attending church every Sunday, I have been taught from a young age that I should not be equally yoked with a non-believer. Part of me understands this, but I really like this guy, and he's the first person to ever make me feel so valued. This situation occurred about 2 months ago. Since then, there have been increasing discussions and arguments about it, as I hardly made any changes and continued to communicate with him frequently throughout the day, including late-night calls. Nonetheless, in the back of my mind, I consistently worried that my parents would eventually insist that I end the relationship entirely. Just 2 days ago, my mother discovered me asleep with my phone against my face. She took the phone from me, and the screen lit up, revealing the conversation between Jay and me. My mother proceeded to scroll through our messages and found out that we stayed on the line for hours each day, even while I was at work, including intimate conversations that we had, which ultimately infuriated her. The following day, I woke up to find my phone missing, and at that moment, I realized I was in serious trouble. To cut a long story short, I took emergency leave from work that day to address this situation at home. My mother told me to leave the house as she no longer wanted to see me and expressed her deep disappointment. She told me I could pack my things and go find Jay and never return. I stepped out and returned home later that afternoon after my father got back. I spent the rest of the day discussing the matter as a family and crying my eyes out. My phone was never returned to me, and my parents instructed me to sever all ties with Jay and to never contact him again. Naturally, I attempted to calmly explain how much Jay meant to me and how I could not just abandon him. That night, I experienced a terrible headache and began to shake. My mother grew worried and sat by my bedside to keep me company until I eventually fell asleep. On day 2, I awoke feeling empty, with a throbbing headache and swollen eyes. By the afternoon, I noticed that Jay had sent numerous text messages and called me multiple times. Feeling drained, I wrote a long message suggesting that we might need a break for a few days. He immediately called my phone, and my mother answered. He spoke with both my parents, resulting in an emotional conversation. Tears were shed by me, him, and even my mother and sister, who were listening nearby. My mother had a few phone conversations previously and had mentioned that he was genuinely a good person who could empathize with her because of his similar childhood. She had always treated him like a son, but she just could not envision him as a son-in-law. Jay expressed his desire to clarify the reasons behind my parents' disapproval of our relationship. My father took the opportunity to lecture him about the need for motivation to improve his situation and emphasized the importance of providing each other with the space needed to focus on personal matters, such as my studies. Everything seemed to improve afterward, even leading to a video call with him later that night, during which Jay asked my parents if he could at least maintain contact with me, even if just for a little while each day. My parents agreed. I still do not have my phone back, so now we have a limited time of 45 minutes each day to either talk or call, and if we do talk, It must be done openly. It has now been day 2 of this arrangement, and I am not coping well. I miss him immensely. I feel utterly exhausted and genuinely uncertain about what to do. I understand that once I pass my exams and obtain my license, which will be in a few months, things may either improve or remain unchanged. I am highly concerned that this shift could affect our relationship in the long run, but at the same time, I hope my parents will eventually come to accept him as a potential partner. Story 4. I, 29F, want to end my relationship with my 50SF, adoptive mom. How do I address this? I will attempt to condense a lengthy narrative into a more concise format. My biological parents disowned me during my teenage years because I chose to leave the Jehovah's Witnesses religion in which I had been raised. Since I turned 17, I have had no contact with them. Now nearly 30, I was legally adopted in 2021 by a couple I have known since my teenage years. I worked alongside my adoptive mother, whom I will refer to as Erin, at my first job when I was 14. Over the years, I called her my spare mom, since I no longer had a biological mother. Erin and her husband, Jacob, have been supportive and helpful, particularly in financial matters. The most significant assistance they provided was purchasing a used car for me in 2020 for about $3,000 when my previous vehicle failed. I offered to repay them, but they declined, and I am very appreciative of their generosity. A significant factor in my decision to accept their offer of adoption was my fear of my biological parents making medical decisions on my behalf. Given their religious beliefs, I understood they might allow me to die rather than receive a blood transfusion, which their faith opposes. When my adoptive parents suggested adult adoption, this concern was a primary reason for my acceptance, along with my long-standing loneliness and desire to feel part of a family. Although we have never been particularly close, I have typically seen them 1 to 3 times a year. I did not anticipate that the legal adoption would alter our relationship. Since the adoption occurred, many changes have taken place in my life, as well as in my relationship with Erin. I married and became a mother. When I got engaged, Erin was one of the first I informed. However, she read my message and did not respond for several days. Eventually, she stated she was not ignoring me but had a lot happening in her life. I was hurt that she did not convey any happiness for me, yet the conversation quickly shifted to other topics. Later, my husband and I eloped. If Erin had made me feel valued, I would have considered inviting her, but she learned of our marriage like everyone else. She seemed offended by her exclusion. Shortly after my marriage, I intentionally became pregnant. Again, Erin was one of the first I notified, but her response was that she would probably be happy for me once she adjusted to the news. I felt upset and unsupported. As my pregnancy progressed, Erin seemed to become more enthusiastic, even pressuring me to visit her more while making rude comments about how infrequently I came over. Let me clarify that she never actually invited me, but only complained. After my child's birth, Erin insisted on visiting the hospital to see my newborn, despite my desire for no visitors following an emergency cesarean section. Since then, she has only seen my child a few times. My husband and I both work full-time and alternate our schedules so that one of us is always with the baby, and I am also facing some recently diagnosed health issues, leaving me with little energy or free time. Erin continues to express her frustration over not seeing my child, whom she refers to as her baby, enough. Yet she has never actually invited me over or suggested planning a visit. She has taken my child from my arms despite my objections and jokingly refused to return her. While she seems eager to establish a relationship with my child, I have very little connection with Erin and feel no motivation to foster one given her behavior over the past few years. Moreover, she has shared some concerning comments that lead me to believe I will never leave my child alone with her. For example, she told me about a time when she had to soothe a friend's fussy baby by placing the infant on her non-lactating breast, which she presented as a perfectly normal action. I was too stunned to respond appropriately at the time. I had planned to visit Erin and Jacob during the holidays, but Erin sent me a message expressing her excitement to see my baby. When I responded with a comment indicating I hoped she meant me too, she replied, "Of course, because you carry the baby in." At that moment, I decided to express my frustrations to Erin about her actions and comments. In response, she attempted to call me numerous times in a row, leaving guilt-laden voicemails about how she would sit in public and cry. Although she issued an apology, she failed to explain her reactions to my previously shared happy news. Eventually, I convinced her to allow me some space, yet she continues to text me for pictures of my daughter. Currently, I feel no desire to maintain a relationship with Erin, but I also struggle with feelings of obligation due to her past support. I have not enjoyed her presence for many years, to the extent that I have found reasons to leave early or avoid her altogether. Conversations with her often leave me feeling frustrated as she tends to dominate discussions and redirect the focus to herself. She is often negative, frequently complaining, which I find mentally exhausting. Since I became a mother, I have felt an increased pressure to spend more time with her, which adds to my stress. There are numerous incidents that have transpired between us that I cannot fully detail, but fundamentally, I desire to know how to terminate our relationship or whether I am wrong for wanting to do so. I would be perfectly fine with never seeing her again. She has never genuinely felt like family to me, and calling her Mom has always felt very uncomfortable. Sometimes, I wonder if she is primarily interested in my child. It's worth noting that she has 2 biological adult children, so it's not as if she has lacked opportunities for maternal experiences. I would appreciate advice on how to delicately inform her that I no longer want her in my life. I generally avoid confrontation and consider myself a people pleaser, making the idea of potentially hurting her feelings while standing my ground quite daunting. In summary, my adoptive mother has repeatedly hurt my feelings and has made me feel as if she is using me for access to my child. I have not enjoyed spending time with her for many years and wish to dissolve our relationship. How can I approach this situation? I am not concerned about the legal implications, but rather the personal side of the issue. Any suggestions regarding what I should say would be appreciated. I have edited and reposted this, as my initial attempt was deleted due to a lack of clarity in my request for advice.